In 2009 recruteren de CIA en de Jordaanse inlichtingendienst een belangrijke spion. Een Jordanees die toegang heeft tot de top van Al-Qaeda en onthullende informatie aan de CIA stuurt. Er wordt een geheime basis in Afghanistan opgetuigd en een ontmoeting gepland. Wanneer de mol arriveert, blaast hij zich volkomen onverwacht op. 7 CIA-medewerkers komen bij die aanslag om het leven. Een van de grootste klappen die de dienst ooit te verwerken kreeg. De dubbelspion bleek een driedubbelspion te zijn. Joby Warrick is sinds 1996 verslaggever voor de Washington Post. Hij won 2 maal een Pulitzer voor zijn journalistieke werk en voor zijn boek Zwarte Vlaggen over de opkomst van de IS. Welkom, Joby, here in Amsterdam.
Dank u wel.
We are here to talk about Triple Agent, released in 2011 in America, but only just now here in the Netherlands. Mm-hmm. But Black Flags, for which you won the Pulitzer Prize, was published in 2015.
Correct.
So how is it for you to talk about a book that was published already 6 years ago?
Yes. It's a wonderful journey backwards in time because I love this story and I love the characters. This is my first book, so it's very meaningful to me. And so I'm just happy for a chance to talk about this fascinating story again.
You already mentioned characters. You write the book also as a real kind of thriller kind of book, but it's non-fiction. Did you do that on purpose to be able to reach a larger, bigger audience?
I think partly because of my style as a journalist is to tell stories. And we get into very complicated subjects in my field, in intelligence and diplomacy and Middle East. And I think that's where I do my best work, is trying to present a complicated situation, but through the stories of individual people, in true life, experiences and encounters. So every word of it is true and factual, but I try to make it interesting and engaging to people by telling a story.
But did you, by writing it like this, also sympathize almost with the terrorists?
Well, what I try to do is to help people understand that terrorists are human beings, that we try to make them into caricatures, into stereotypes or archetypes, but they're actually very complicated human beings. In order to understand an adversary, you really have to know them. And so I wanted people to be able to read the story of this triple agent, this bomber who fooled the CIA, but understand him as a human being, why he did the things he did. Not because he was a bad person necessarily, but because of the complicated journey that he went through in his life, leading him to this incredible historic moment, all of which really happened, and I wanted people to understand how it happened.
If you would have to characterize Balawi, who was the main character in this book, how would you...
A very complicated man who lived between two worlds. He was Western in some sense. He was a physician, so he was educated. He studied medicine in Turkey. He had an ambition to practice in the West. He wanted to go to the United States. He spoke English very well. So in some ways, it's a person that Americans and Europeans could identify with and understand. And at the same time, he had this deep passion about events in the Middle East, about his own people. He was a Palestinian. And so he had this whole other side that's very foreign to our thinking.
How did you get into his head, into his mind?
That was really what intrigued me and convinced me to do this book, because as a reporter for the Washington Post, I covered the events as they happened. So we knew about this terrible bombing in Afghanistan, and 7 Americans had been killed, the worst tragedy for the CIA in decades. Mm-hmm. But the person that was most fascinating to me was this agent. And so I had to try to find a way to get into his head, to understand his past. It involved going to the Middle East and getting to know his family and talking to his parents and his brothers and sisters. It involved looking at his videotapes. He made many videos. So I had a lot of his story through his own words and through his own writing in some cases. So over time, I felt like I really did begin to understand the person and tried to communicate that in the book.
And was he a sane person?
He was, because he was sane and he was very clever, because it turns out that, as you get into his story, no one really knew what side he was on, that he was managing to kind of navigate and survive in this very dangerous world where he was between the CIA and Al-Qaeda, both sides a little bit suspicious of him, neither side really knowing who he was, and yet he managed to keep true to himself, decided what he wanted to do, and then acted on it.
You wrote Black Flags. which won a Pulitzer Prize, about the race of ISIS. But for me, I'm still a bit mystified. Can you explain the situation for a simple person like me?
If it is a different thing than Al-Qaeda. In my country, at least, we felt that we understood this jihadist thing because we knew bin Laden and we knew what he was trying to do. We knew how he was doing it. But Zarqawi and the Islamic State came along as a separate strain. They were actually so brutal and so violent that Al-Qaeda didn't like them. Al-Qaeda mistrusted them.
After all the things you have seen till now, do you think the world is still basically a good place?
I do, because one great thing about being a journalist, as you know, is you get to meet all kinds of people. And we all struggle in our unique ways, but there's a goodness, I think, at the core of human beings.
By reading your books, your children, other young people can feel more compassion with the Islamic State.
Yeah, and I guess what I'm searching for and hoping for with my kids and with other readers is not so much compassion, but an understanding that this is very complicated. And that when our leaders try to say that all these are evil people and we're just going to wipe them out, it's not as easy as that.
No, and it's not that black.
That's right. And there are grievances that are real in that part of the world. The response to those grievances, acts of violence against innocent men and women and children, that's not appropriate and not acceptable. But there are real reasons and real roots to these problems and reasons for the things they do. Absolutely. And if we understand them, then we can have a more complicated and more sophisticated response as we try to combat this threat to us.
Thank you so much for this conversation.
It's my pleasure. Dank u wel.
Dank je wel.